Thank you so much for being here. You are from the Customer Insight Studio called Ponder, and I'm wondering if you could start us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do at Ponder.
Zach. My background, I actually was a software developer for a long time, studied computer science, code, and did that for a little while. And then every program comes to this crossroads. And the crossroads is, are you one of the top 10% or are you everybody else? And I was everybody else. Fortunately, I really like the business side of software. I like talking to people. And so I just naturally gravitated a little bit more towards management, doing things like business and enjoyed it. But then we did this situation where I did this really one of our clients, and I was out with the president of this company. We were having a drink to celebrate, and he said, website is great, works perfectly. The customers that are on it love it. How can you help me get more new customers into my system to start using this website? And I thought, no one's ever asked me a question like that, and I had no idea. And so I became extremely interested in that point of, how do companies make money? And so that was my starting point into moving more into marketing. And so the challenges that got me really excited as I moved into that space required research. I was really interested in how do people make decisions? How do people hear about things? How do people decide to buy products and not buy products? And that's kind of like in a long journey to launching Ponder at the beginning of the year with a former client who has a background in product strategy, product marketing. And so when chance came to work together, we decided let's start something new, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, that's a great origin story going from all the way on the software end where you're like, hey, I just build the thing. Don't ask me where the customer's coming
Yeah.
from. All the way to customer acquisition and product strategy and everything else. So when I took a look at your website, it kind of, well, one, I love the way that you kind of frame it. I think on your LinkedIn it says you're a customer insight studio. And so you're clearly very, insights driven, research driven. And so can you tell us a little bit about what kind of makes your work different at Ponder as opposed to maybe just another marketing agency? It seems like you really kind of zeroed in on this understanding the customer. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
So the idea for a studio is something that we have a big vision for it. I don't know if we'll ever be able to do it, but we actually imagine this physical space. And the reason is that I think it can be very hard to wrestle with the truths of what are discovered sometimes during research. Just this morning, Mike and I were giving a presentation to a client, and the way that we presented information in video. So what we like to do is when we're presenting, we're not just sharing a slide deck, but we're actually showing videos. We want to roll the tape and experience the things that people are saying when you actually get them to those vulnerable moments and conversations. And I was watching as we were giving the presentation, and people were like covering their heads and squirming and wishing there was a rock that they could go hide behind. And I don't want, it's never about embarrassing anyone or making anyone feel bad about their work, but sometimes we need to have emotional experiences to really help us deal with hard realities. And so that's the idea of the studio. The studio is a place where you come in, and as you walk in, there's a mirror right in front of you, and you have to like face really who it is that you are and who you want to be, and then you go in and you kind of wrestle with different things that customers say, and then try to experiment with how do we react to that with our product, and how do we react to that with our message and our sales process.
That's awesome, and I have to say it's very distinct from a lot of the other kind of, I guess, more run-of-the-mill approaches that you see in other consultancies or agencies. And so I have some questions about research and things like that that I'd like to get into. But one thing I'd like to understand a little bit more from your perspective is uh, the role of those human experiences in both the research side and how those human experiences really inform things like product development or go-to-market strategies. Because for me, a big part of what we do is we really want to put human feedback at the center of research initiatives. So, we are inundated with tons of quantitative metrics, and we can track clicks, and we can track all sorts of digital footprint. But something that I feel gets kind of lost sometimes is the human voice, the human experience. Like you said,
Hmm.
kind of the emotional kind of quality of the person who is using the product or buying the product. So can you tell me, maybe this could just be your high level view of like the importance of human centered sort of research and feedback in what you do?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I'll start out by acknowledging I think there are lots of different types of research, lots of different types of research that are important. A lot of them are not at all interesting to me, and so there's no way that I would want to run a firm that is doing any of those things. The things I think that are really interesting and the things that really make us human are it's very uncommon for a human to sit across the table or on the other side of Zoom and have any interest in what is going on or what has happened in the life of the other person. And so when we actually have those conversations, people will start to um, unpack and they'll go and explore and they'll start thinking through and sharing aspects of their experience that maybe weren't even in their mind. So if you were just to sit down and ask a customer, "Hey, why did you do something?" they're not going to be able to answer that in any sort of a meaningful way. It requires us to engage in a conversation, to ask follow up questions, sometimes to introduce a little bit of discomfort and pressure and challenge people a little bit. But what happens when we do that is you think you're going to offend people or you think they're going to shut off, but people love hearing these conversations. In fact, I bet you 95% of the time we have these conversations and the people we're interviewing thank us because it was a really helpful reflection. And so that's why I think the human side of it is so important, is because there's so much intent type of information. There's so much emotional force that we're all expressing in all of our decisions. And unless we have that conversation and unless we get really human and face to face and physical and challenging with people, it's just going to go, it's just falls by the wayside and ends up being ignored. And that's why I think the human element of the research is so critical because sometimes we don't even know what questions to ask until we do that type of work. We can run surveys, we can measure clicks, we can measure things, but until we really understand those deep intents, we don't always know the full context of what it is that we're measuring.
That's very well said, and this is I'm biased, but it's music to my ears because I just love you know talking to folks who are really
Yeah.
putting people at the center of what should be a very human process, which is research. It's the process of understanding others, right? Um, and so I love how you're, really centering the human experience and kind of the emotional quality um, of their responses in what you do. So I'd like to just get into a little bit of a customer and market research methodology here. Um, and
Hmm.
so one thing that I saw on your website that I found very interesting is I'm reading it here is a quote that says, "Customers are rarely buying what you're selling, and you
All
won't
right.
find what you need in your echo chamber." So it sounds like, from your perspective, companies tend to fall into some traps when it comes to their messaging, their product design, what have you. So can you tell me, first off, what do you think leads companies into these traps? How do they kind of what leads them to experience these pitfalls, and then maybe we can talk about what you do to help move them out of there.
Yeah. So the the first quote is interesting because when you look at what customers generally want progress or transformation or they want power. There's this old quote that I heard when I first got into this type of work, and it was like, quarters customers don't want a quarter-inch drill; they want a quarter-inch hole in the wall. To which just always to me didn't seem quite right. And it's like, no, what customers actually want is they want something that's going to let them drill a hole wherever they want, whenever they want to. So it's like it's really more about the power that people have and the control over their situation. And so um that I think customers buying what people are selling. I mean, inevitably, ultimately, we're all selling a product. But what customers are wanting is they're wanting some sort of transformation or change when they adopt our products for the first time. And that to me, that's one of those hidden under the surface sorts of things that can be very valuable when you're needing a fresh perspective on how you're messaging your product or even what you're going to do to change it and innovate with it. But the second thing I think you asked is actually more interesting. And this is what I think happens. I call it like the growth trap. And so the types of companies that we like to work with are companies that have already had some success and they're hitting the stage where now if they want to grow, they have to go into this new territory that's unfamiliar to them. So we've got this successful product. Now we want to figure out how to sell it to this new segment. Or we've been working in this segment and now we're trying to create some new product that they want. And what happens is companies are, there's this algorithm called explore and exploit. And explore is about going out and finding new things, right? Like you move to a new city and you want to go out and find all the different restaurants. But then after you've sampled all the different restaurants, you find two or three that you really like and you go there over and over. And that's the exploit thing. So it's the same way with growth, Zach. And what we see happen is companies end up being built to exploit opportunities that they know really well, right? And so it's like we have a product or we have a customer base or a customer segment or one or two segments, and the whole organization is built around that product and serving that segment. But what happens is when you need to go out and do something new, now everything that you know about your current customers is probably not completely wrong. It's not 100% wrong, but it's wrong enough that if you take it and try to go into this new territory, you're not going to be successful. And that, so that requires a very different shift in mindset and almost requires you to unknow or willfully put on ignorance and go out and kind of start from scratch and go out and learn to explore. So companies that are built to exploit are rarely very good at exploring. And even if they are good enough at exploring, at some point you have to say, hey, I have enough information. We now have this new thing that we need to go out and exploit. And making that transition can be very painful. So that's the type of challenge that we like to come in and help. And I think that quote that you cited was something like, you won't find what you need in your echo chamber. Companies that are really, really good at listening to their customers and knowing them intimately are really generally they really struggle to go out. You actually built this very positive type of echo chamber that says, hey, we know our customer really well. And so living inside of that echo chamber when you're needing information about something outside, that echo chamber can really work against you.
That's such an interesting idea because, you know, conventional wisdom would kind of tell you, hey, once you really understand your customer, you've done the hard work and you've achieved the thing that is, we should all be shooting for, which is, understand your customer, listen to them, integrate, what you hear from them into your business to
Yeah.
make better products. But there's this sort of unseen trap that you've identified here, which is if you need to grow beyond that customer, if that is the entirety of your worldview is this is who our customer is,
Yep.
all of a sudden you're applying, sort of inapplicable, knowledge or understanding to these like new market segments. And so what it sounds like
Yeah.
is you kind of help people go almost back to like a beginner mindset of like, remember when you were a startup and you didn't know who your customer was, and so you were just looking
Yep.
everywhere for for traction.
That's right.
They,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah. You're a
um,
solution in search of a problem. That's exactly that's exactly it.
yeah. So that's I've actually hadn't really considered that before. How that sort of that success can actually be a hindrance in certain senses. So that's really interesting to think about. And I find it interesting that that's sort of your I guess sweet spot as like a as a studio. So could you maybe tell me a little bit about like what is your process? What is it like to work with companies who on certain measures have it all figured out? They're firing on all cylinders. They know their customer really well, but they actually have this huge blind spot over here where they don't understand their new customers or their new market segment as well as they think they do. So how do you approach that?
Yeah. Well, so another thing you'll notice about us, so we say we're a customer insight studio. So we do the things that we don't do. We don't build websites. We don't write content. We don't do product strategy. We don't do product design. We don't do product development. We don't do anything except for insights. And I'm going to tell you the number one reason why. The number one reason why is when you're going out and trying to explore new territory, we have found at least half of the time that we do a project like that, we come back and the real answer is, hey, you need to not do this. And it's our job to actually help them understand the insurmountable challenges that they're going to have if they try to go into this new territory. Now we can't do that if I'm counting on a big project where I'm going to be doing product design and things like that. I'm not ever going to come back and say don't do this. And so we make the scope of our work extremely narrow and extremely strategic so that we can give that advice when that needs to happen. So the first thing I would say is when we engage in these things, that's number one, is being in a position politically, financially, operationally, where we can try to help people understand, like, hey, this isn't the right way to go. There are other times when it comes back and it says, we say, there's something out there, but it's not the thing that you thought it was. And we had this client a couple of years ago called Dream. It's a French company. They sell a headband that you wear while you sleep, and extremely successful in the EU. And they were selling it to people who had insomnia, but they were starting to tap out on their growth potential, and they were looking for new stuff. And so the questions they were asking are, hey, can we get this thing into the United States as a consumer product? And so we go out, we run our method, and we come back and we start to say, like, hey, this isn't going to work, and here's XYZ reasons why US consumer market is not going to adopt the product unless you make significant changes to it. But we heard this hint that there is this other certain type of B2B customer that might be very interested in it. And that just gave them that opened the door just a crack so that they were able to go through, and they completely pivoted their business. And so I'm sorry, now I've kind of like lost track of what the discussion topic was, but I think the things I wanted to bring up are, a lot of times when you explore, the important thing is that you don't have it right. And it's our job almost to debug and say, okay, well, we know that it's not right, but we need to figure out what's wrong about it so that we can take some sort of meaningful course of action.
Yeah, no, very well said. And that the ability to say no to an opportunity, even when everybody's fired up and they're sure that, hey, this is the new market segment for us, this customer is going to love us. Uh,
Yep.
it seems great to have someone like you who can come in and say, hey, my paycheck does not depend on me telling you yes, you should do this. So I'm going to tell you no, you should not do this, and save a ton of money in the process. Um,
Yeah. Yep.
So, one thing I wanted to ask about that kind of process is, could you tell us a little bit about your research methodology, and not asking for any secret sauce or anything, but just maybe high level, how you kind of approach market research, customer research. Is it a mix of
Mhm.
qualitative and quantitative? Surveys, interviews, um, digital touch points, anything to just kind of help us understand how you do your job.
Yeah. So we have two research methods. Number one is it's very broadly fits into the win-loss research category. And so that's where we want to go and study customers who made some sort of a decision. And we may look at various stages of the journey. So if we're working with, say, a B2B software company who has a sales process, we may go back and study people who got a demo and then never showed up again. And we would say, what was happening with that? What was that decision all about? Or sometimes, we'll go all the way through trying the product or dealing with the proposal, churn and renewal decisions. So we're looking at the entire customer journey, and we're studying decisions that people made. And so that method, we follow something that's roughly fits um, a category of interview called the switch interview, or the jobs to be done interview. Customer case study, I think, is another. And what we're looking for is revealed preferences and a timeline. And what we find, again, people have a hard time answering those, not because they're deceptive, but because they don't really remember it, and they probably didn't think about it that much in the first place. And so we have to do a lot of digging to really help them even get back to, what were the facts that led up to making that decision, so that we can report that. And so that's our research method, that's about studying the historical record. And I don't know how interesting that is, or unique or uncommon. I think our way of sharing those insights might be interesting and uncommon, but the method itself maybe isn't that interesting. And we can talk about the sharing of insights if you'd like. But the
I,
second thing
I,
we had,
oh, sorry.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
you'd like to hear about that?
I would, but I don't want to cut you off there. So if you want to tell us the second thing, and then we can get into insights, that sounds perfect.
Okay, great. So the second method we have, I don't know the right name for it yet. We've tended to call it simulated sales. And here's the way it works is if you have some new product that you want to sell, or you have some new segment that you want to go out and sell to, here are things you can't do. You can't get a bunch of people together and run a focus group because everybody has a few drinks, everybody feels really good, and all the people who that you just fed food and gave drinks to, they just want to make you happy and they're going to tell you anything you want to hear, no matter how good of a question asker you are. This is my belief. Um, if you want to, there's lots of different ways you can have a conversation. What we believe is that you can't really study. First of all, you can never know if someone's going to buy something or not. So we got to throw that out the window. The next best thing I think that we can have is we can try to understand why would they not buy it, and what are going to be the real issues that you're going to have when you go out and try to sell this thing to a new audience. Now, this works for products that are sold that way, and it works for consumer products like sleep headbands that track. So it's almost like you're going door to door selling. And so what we do is we essentially put together a conversation where we start out and we just start out by talking about needs. Hey, we kind of had this hunch that there are a lot of people who don't sleep very well, and people that wake up in the middle of the night and can't fall back to sleep, or people that have a hard time falling asleep. Like, is that something that you've ever experienced before? And people will start opening up and talking about it. And as we have a conversation, we'll hear incredible things about what the lack of sleep means to people, or whatever problem domain we're looking at. We'll start to bring to surface a little bit of emotion so that people are starting to think now about, like, yeah, what was it like when I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning the other day and couldn't fall back asleep? Right. And so we want to surface those feelings and those emotions. And, what would it be like if you didn't? We'd hear, yeah. And so we want to bring those emotions to the surface so that when we put our customer's product in front of them and we try to sell it to them, they're not just giving feedback based out of nothing. Now the pump has actually been primed and they're ready to start thinking about it. Now, what we want to do when we're having these conversations is we want to flesh out a couple of different categories of problems. The number one problem is what we call a multiply by zero error. And so, Zach, if I'm going to try to sell you something and I put this pitch deck in front of you and you're looking at this thing and you're like, what even is he talking about? I don't understand. I don't understand the words he's using or the pictures that are on the screen or what he's. So we call that a multiply by zero error because there's a comprehension problem. The way that we're explaining the offering to you, you will never buy it because you don't even understand what we're talking about. And so we'll stratify some issues with along those lines, like, here's some really big problems that need to be fixed right away. And then there are these next level of things, and these are maybe like trust issues, or hey, this is cool. You showed me this deck and you gave me a couple of customer testimonials, but the examples that you were giving me were someone who's in a completely different situation than me. And so then we can start to tease out, like, oh, they're not connecting. And so that's what we're doing. So we're going through the sales process, but because we're basing what we're doing in a scientific process where we want to understand what's wrong rather than understand what's working, that allows us to really dig in and identify challenges um, that can either be solved or should be abandoned. So those are really our two methods for how we gather data. And I know you said you were interested in how we surface insights back. And so I can speak a little bit about that if you'd like.
Yeah. So first, thank you for kind of taking us through that process. In particular, the simulated sales
Yeah, everyone's yeah, it's
approach is
interesting.
is super interesting, and I really liked what you said about kind of trying to surface those emotions and kind of prime the pump as you're having those conversations, because I think ultimately what companies want with their product and their messaging and associated go to market strategy is they want something that resonates emotionally with the end user,
Yeah.
and ideally not
Yep.
just in their marketing but when they buy the product and they use it and they say, wow, my life is so much better because now I have XYZ that I didn't have before. So it makes sense that you want to try to surface those emotions in the research phase as well. um, So I would love to talk about the insights. And so this is something that we think a lot about at my company, which is there are the sort of facts that you can surface from a research initiative. So you can say, here's what people said, here's the
Yep.
report, here's the dashboard. And the insights are essentially answering, so what? So that's great. People said XYZ. What can I do with it? What does it mean for me as a business? Um, you know, how can I take action on these research findings? So I would love to hear from you. How do you think about deriving insights from your research, and how do you go from insights to action for your clients?
Yep. Yep. Great question. So I think of it almost as I don't know, some combination of theatrical and political, right? And so,
Okay.
um, you know, yeah. So again, emotions are very important, and we need to make people feel things. And a a deck that is posted into Slack doesn't make anybody feel anything, right? And so we know there are a few things. So first of all, we had this analogy of, we need to roll the tape. And so we have these forcing functions that say, hey, we're going to get everyone in the room, and we're actually going to roll the tape, and we're going to see how, like, we're going to listen to what people actually said. And for people who are data holics, sometimes that can feel a little bit not very data oriented. But our job is not to. There's always more research that follows up the work that we do. So we're trying to create an experience. And so I would say the first thing that we do is we try to separate up the work of empathizing with the research with the work of acting on it. And so what I don't want to do is I don't want to straight up go into, hey, here's all this stuff that we heard from people. Okay, what are we going to do? That's rushing it. And what ends up happening with that is everyone just figures out how what they just heard aligns to whatever pet project they've been thinking has been important for a long time. And so what we need to do is there's this really hard work of we are just going to sit and listen and debate what it is that people are wanting, expressing, needing, desiring. Now, the funny thing about all this emotional stuff is I'm really bad with my own emotions. Like someone will ask me how I'm doing and I'll say I'm hungry. Do you know what I mean? And so it's like it's a very funny thing that I'm very, very interested in the emotions that other people have, but I'm very bad at like understanding my own. Or my wife will say, "Why are you so angry?" And I'll say, "I'm not angry. What are you talking about?" And so, I want to just recognize, like, I think this is like an interesting thing that we're trying to do with people because it's hard for me, and I think it's hard for others to do for themselves. So the first thing we need to do is we really need to create this space and experience where people are going to connect with the human beings and the stories that we heard from. And so first phase of so the other thing I want to say is I think in insight research projects, so much of the work and strain and resource goes into just simply writing that report that by the time the researcher has hit send on that report, they're just wiped out and exhausted. Like I've burned my fuel that I have for this, and it's time for me to go on to the next thing. So we try to make it so that our projects are resourced in a way that the activation part of it is as much fuel is used in that as is used in the insight. So I should have mentioned that at the beginning. So, but there are two phases. So phase one is empathizing with and wrestling with what we heard. And then the second thing then is taking what it is that we heard and then applying that to some sort of action. Now, I would not probably take on a project with a pharmaceutical company or a car manufacturer. There are two or three domains that I would say Mike and I know extremely well, and we know then the types of things that we heard and how that is going to be useful or not to different functions that are going to have to wrestle with it. So just because we heard something interesting during research does not mean that we need to then share that out. What we really know is, hey, there's a product marketing team and they're wrestling with this type of stuff, or there's a go to market team and they're needing this type of information. And so I think this is part of the skill that an insights person needs to have is the insights person really needs to understand how do we gather and then share data that's going to be relevant to the action that needs to be taken. I think that's a really important part of it. Like you can't just make something actionable because you will it to be. It's actually a whole process of let's gather the right type of data in this. So we get into these then activity phases where um, we try to figure out how do we know what it is that they're trying to do, and how do we use this information, knowing that the information is not the goal. It's like a lack of information is the constraint. And I know that probably sounds like very zen. It sounds kind of like John Lennon-ish as I say it, but I think it's a really important distinction. Like our goal is not to give people knowledge. Our goal is to remove a constraint of ignorance that is blocking some sort of action. So if we really understand well what that ignorance is, and we can give a type of experience that helps that ignorance be removed at the individual and team level, that's what it is that makes insights actionable.
That was incredibly well said. And whether or not it was John Lennon-ish or Zen, it was excellent. So I really like that. It's kind of focusing on, yeah, you're removing this negative quality as opposed to simply trying to provide more information or, yeah, focusing on the quantity of new information that you can deliver. Rather, it's
Yeah.
kind of starting from a point of saying, what is yeah what is the ignorance that we are trying to alleviate essentially, and then that is going to inform essentially the
Yep.
insights that you pull out of the data. um,
Yep.
it relates to something I heard in an in another conversation I had recently. Someone talk about using sort of your end goal almost as a filter, on just on the other side of your research process. So as you're gathering data, it should be with some sort of end in mind. And similar to what you said, uh, when you understand the question you're trying to answer, or in your case, the ignorance that you are trying to resolve, that's really going to inform kind of, I guess, the delivery of the insights. Um, so
Yep.
yeah, very, very interesting. I wanted to move on. So I know we're coming up on time here, so I just have like two rapid fire questions, if that's okay, and then
Yep. Okay.
we can
I'll give you a
probably
rapid
wrap.
fire answer.
Cool. Your answer doesn't have to be rapid fire, but it's more of just a, I don't know, it's just like a fun question I like to ask at the end. So, uh, do you have any, when it comes to research and insights, do you have any hot takes or like a particularly spicy perspective on what is good or bad about research, what is done well or isn't done well, anything, just kind of in your experience that you have a strong feeling for?
Mm. One of the opinions I have that people don't like, and I didn't like even when I heard it the first time, is that empathy is not a good thing, right? Like empathy is a tool that can be used for good and it can be used for bad. There's this German psychologist named Heinz Kohut who did a lot of the pioneering work around empathy. And as an old man, he gave this presentation to I think it was the American Psychological Association. And he says, I just need to clear the air about a few things related to empathy. He's like, the most empathetic people that I've ever known were the Nazis during World War II, because what they did is they used their empathy to figure out that when they would send planes into a city, they could only bomb a certain part of the city, but if they wanted to terrorize the whole city, and so they would put those, they made this, like, I don't, it's some kind of a whirring sound, like a whistle almost, on the planes, so that everybody in the whole area would hear and would be terrorized. And it took empathy for them to be able to do that. So Heinz Kohut's thing was, empathy can be used, it's a powerful tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. And so that's one of the things that I think is really important for all of us. Even when we're doing our work, I don't want to help someone empathize with a customer if they're going to use that for bad. In fact, Mike and I were just talking about who are the types of companies that we would not work with, right? So it's like, I don't always want to provide empathetic insights to help people succeed with every end. There are political parties I wouldn't work with, there are politicians I wouldn't work with, there are companies. And so we all, I think, just need to recognize, like, empathy is not always good. It's not as a good thing. It's a powerful tool that we need to use inside of some sort of ethical bounds.
No,
That's
that's
my
a
hot
great
take.
one. No, that's a great one. I appreciate that. Um, and then the last thing that I just want to ask is, can you just tell people kind of where to find you, if they want to learn more about
Mm-hmm.
you and Ponder, just kind of where you are in the
Yep.
digital world or physical
So
world?
you need to talk to us if you have one of two challenges. right? So if you are starting to notice that your buyers who have behaved a certain way for a long time are now starting to do different things, your close loss rates are going down, your different types of conversions or funnel performance points are not performing the way you need, that's a problem that we can solve. And if you've got some new territory or new product that you need to figure out, then you need to call us. And there are two ways that you can really connect with us. We have a website, let'sponder.it. So let's ponder it and think about it together. That's what we do. And then I'm also really super active on LinkedIn. I think that's how you and I got connected.
It is. Yeah, I found you through I think I was searching for, great posts on customer research and insights, and then Eric White came up. So that's how we got connected. And I would encourage other people to check out your content on LinkedIn. I think it's great, and check out your website. Um, like I said at the beginning, I when I first kind of went and browsed around your site, I was like, I love this. They have a unique perspective on customer insights, and the way you
Yeah,
kind of
cool.
language the site really landed with me. So um, Eric, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here today and sharing all of this knowledge with us. And yeah, just thank you again. This has been awesome.
The key is to asking good questions, and you asked great ones. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.